Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this June 1st, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Police in France have arrested a man in connection with a fatal shooting at the Jewish Museum in Brussels. That's our opening story tonight from the BBC.
A cold-blooded killing caught on CCTV. 8 days ago, a man walked into the Jewish Museum in Brussels and opened fire with a handgun, and then a Kalashnikov. 3 people were killed and another is clinically dead. Now an arrest has been made at a bus station in Marseille after a random drug search. This is the suspect in custody, named by prosecutors as Mehdi Nemouche. He's now being questioned at the headquarters of the French Domestic Intelligence Agency. In his possession when he was arrested were guns of the type used in Brussels, one of them wrapped in a jihadist flag, and a video in which the authorities say he claimed responsibility for the attack.
He was probably radicalized the last year and is presumed to have joined fighting jihadist groups in Syria in 2013.
At the scene of the crime, the museum is still closed and security is highly visible. But all this could be part of a rather disturbing bigger picture. The potential connection between the shootings that happened here and the civil war in Syria will be of huge concern to governments and intelligence agencies across Europe. Thousands of European citizens are known to have gone to Syria to fight for jihadist groups. Monitoring those that return is now a priority. Jewish leaders here say security needs to remain tight. The president of the museum told me he took little satisfaction from the arrest in France.
They've got a few thousand people who can replace this killer.
So there's still a lot.
It's the first step, but it's not finished.
And images like this inside a museum mean this is an issue now attracting the highest level of political attention.
C'est que nous faisons tout pour que ces djihadistes.
We're doing all we can so that these jihadists, either people who have been in Syria or are there now, are followed and prevented from doing harm wherever they are, and notably when they return to France and Europe.
As people continue to pay their respects, the Belgian authorities are applying for the extradition of the suspect, but many questions remain. Chris Morris, BBC News, Brussels.
Thank you, Chris Morris. Friends, troubles for the modern nations of Israel continue, and I say nations, not just the little nation of Israel in the Middle East, but those who understand where the lost 10 tribes are today can be seeing that Jacob's trouble is on the increase. And for one of the sons of Joseph, a war of words has erupted between the U.S. and China at a security conference in Singapore. The row started after the U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel accused Beijing of destabilizing the South China Sea in the way it has been handling territorial disputes with neighboring countries in Asia. Wendy Urquhart reports.
Security was tight on the last day of the conference, but it was inside, not outside, that restraint was needed. China's been at loggerheads with Japan, Vietnam and the Philippines over a series of bitter territorial disputes, and the US has had enough of the aggressive attitude of Beijing towards its Asian neighbours. On Saturday, the US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel's message to China was loud and clear. Stop creating trouble in the South China Sea and don't even think about employing strong-arm tactics over territorial disputes with Japan, Vietnam and the Philippines, because the US is watching and Beijing will not get away with it. On Saturday night, a senior Chinese army officer stepped up to the podium and went off script with this reaction to Mr. Hagel's speech.
This speech by Mr. Hagel is full of hegemony, full of words of threat and intimidation. It was a speech to abet destabilizing factors, to create troubles and make provocations.
It wasn't just the US that felt the wrath of Beijing. The Chinese delegate also accused the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the US Defense Secretary of coordinating their remarks and encouraging each other to attack China in their speeches. The problem is that clashes like this one between a Chinese and Vietnamese vessel are common in the South and East China Seas as China tries to assert control in the region. The US says it's determined to put diplomacy first, but clearly wants to let Beijing know that action like this will not be tolerated. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
Friends, our next story relates to China also. There have been some tremendous gale force winds in China, and more than 100 people had to be rescued who were trapped on highways in gale force winds that whipped up a sandstorm. The force 12 gale reduced visibility to less than 2 meters. Rescuers tied ropes between the cars that helped the trapped drivers and passengers to safety. Katharina Moe has the report on it.
Wind thick with sand, laced with stones, lash around rescue workers. Another sandstorm in northwest China, this time in Tulufang City, trapping hundreds in their cars on the highways.
The wind was quite strong, and the flying stones broke the glass on the vehicles. We had nowhere to hide.
On the Tulufang Tuxin Highway, rescuers barely held on themselves during gale force winds. Visibility reduced to less than 2 meters. They attached ropes between the trapped cars and the rescuing armoured vehicle. The priority, getting the elderly, women and children in first. Sandstorms have become an increasingly regular feature of life in North China, the result of decades of desertification and the Gobi Desert creeping further south. Katharina Moe, BBC News.
Thank you, Katharina Moe. And friends, you know, with these stories from China, that last one relates to, let's take a look at our chart here. That last one relates to the fourth seal, the pale horse. Jesus Christ saying that when he answered his disciples as to what would be the signs of his second coming and of the end of this age, he described events that relate to the first 4 seals of Revelation. He described other things too, but these first 4 are the only things we're seeing happening so far. The next major event in prophecy to occur yet in the future will be the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation. And when we see the first 4 seals, which have been active since Christ, when we see them accelerate, Christ saying that eventually, just before the Great Tribulation, before the 5th seal, we would see this 4th seal, the pale horse. We'd see the seismus he mentioned be diverse all over the world, happening in different places. And the seismus meaning not just earthquakes, as King James translates it in one word, but a good Greek-English lexicon will tell you that the word Jesus Christ used there was not a word that just means earthquakes. Seismus means seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, soon typhoons, hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. And it also means commotions on the ground. It gives the example of earthquakes, but that could also be volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, etc., etc. And when you see these things increase and all over the world, and you see some of them that are the worst ever, as we saw in news 2 weeks ago, then you can know, as Christ said, that summer is nigh. And he went on right after that to explain that, to know that the next seal in prophecy is on the horizon, about to occur down the road. just a short ways, because after spring comes summer. When you see the evidence of spring, we're seeing the evidence of such increased activity. We know Great Tribulation's got to be near. We see Europe coming together. One of the things that occurs during the Great Tribulation is the coming together of a United States of Europe, this United Europe thing, the EU, coming into such a federation that it'll be redistributed, redistricted. The borders will be remapped or redistricted, probably by the Pope eventually, who will ride herd over the United States of Europe to come. He will hold the coronation ceremony that will occur in Frankfurt, Germany, in the Emperor's Hall, which I've been mentioning a lot lately, how the United States helped to rebuild the Emperor's Hall after the Allied bombers blew it up at the end of World War II, toward the end. Just before World War II was over, the Allied bombers blew up the Emperor's Hall in Frankfurt, Germany. After the war, United States taxpayers, through the Marshall Plan, helped rebuild the Emperor's Hall, which is the place where all of the emperors of the Roman Empire, and especially those of the Holy Roman Empire, were coronated, where the Pope put the crown on them for their reign during different eras, time periods of the Holy Roman Empire, which is about to be revived. Mussolini revived it for a short time between 1936 and 1945, restoring the Holy Roman Empire for 9 years as the ninth head, sixth head, depending on how you count it, ninth horn, ninth head, sixth of the 10 remaining horns and heads. There's a chart that helps a lot, because in the chart you can count it off, you can layer it out, spreadsheet it, so you can understand what it was Daniel was saying in the early parts of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. You could see how those things he said in Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7 relate to Daniel 8, and how they relate to, let me come out to a wider shot on this, and how they relate to Revelation 13 and Revelation 17. If you spreadsheet them, you can see, all these different dreams and visions that Daniel was able to reveal, revealing the dream of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2, revealing the visions that he revealed in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, and then seeing how those things correlate to Revelation 13 and Revelation 17 down through history. Now that's the top part of our chart. There's more to the chart. We come down to the bottom part of the chart, and we get into the modern time. And at the very, very, very bottom of that chart, come down below the red line, the last two columns, the next to last column shows the sixth head. He actually shows the ninth horn of Daniel 7, which is the same as the sixth of the remaining seventh horns, the sixth of the seven remaining horns of Revelation 13. It's described as the sixth head in Revelation 17. All the same thing, though. It's the same as the ninth horn of Daniel 7. And that head, let's call it by the term used in the chapter with the gold there, Revelation 17, that sixth head was revived in 1936 when Mussolini invaded and conquered Ethiopia. And then that revived the Holy Roman Empire for a brief period of 9 years. And then with the death of Mussolini, sent that head back into the pit, or into the abyss, or back into a dormant sleeping stage, awaiting the seventh head to come out of that pit, that seventh head to culminate in the crowning by the Pope of an emperor in Frankfurt, Germany, most likely an Assyrian emperor, a German, who will then be he'll be what the Bible calls a beast. He'll be the head of the new and revived Holy Roman Empire. And that'll happen during the fifth seal that you see in this chart, 5 columns over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great, that's called in Revelation and in Matthew 24 also by Jesus Christ, the Great Tribulation. And actually, I think I may have just told you that incorrectly. I know Jesus Christ calls it the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24, beginning in verse 20. But in Revelation 6, where these first 6 seals are mentioned, when Christ speaks through John, speaks of the 5th seal being opened, in verse 9 he says, "And when he had opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, and for the testimony which they had. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" You know, there were a number of people saints who have been martyred throughout history, but it's nothing like the coming martyrdom that'll occur during the Great Tribulation. And here's how you know that this parallels and spreadsheets out to what Jesus Christ said in Matthew 24. When you match it up, you look at verse 20 of Matthew 24, and you see Jesus Christ describing this. Pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Verse 21 is where we want to start for this. "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, to this time, no, nor ever shall be." And just before that, he has described the situation being like this, backing up to about verse 9. Verse 8, "All these are the beginning of sorrows." He's speaking in between, when he says verse 8, he's in between seal 4 and seal 5, and he's referring back to the first 4 seals when he says all these. And he's starting with verse 5, he describes the first seal. "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and deceive many." That's your white horse. And verse 6, "And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars." That's your second seal, depicted in Revelation 6 as a red horse, of war and rumors of war and world war, nations against nations. "See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation." Now the red seal turns to world war. That red seal didn't become world war until 1914 with the first round of world war, ending in 1918 when Germany surrendered unconditionally, but is not considered in some circles to be the end of that war until the treaty was signed in 1919, a treaty that the United States refused to sign because they thought the conditions were too extreme upon Germany. Oh, how wonderful and nice are the people of the United States, Joseph. "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be the third seal, the black horse that Jesus Christ says, there shall be famines. And the fourth seal that's described in Revelation as a pale horse whose rider is named Death, alongside whom Hades, hell, the grave rides." And he'll have a little, let's see, the black horse we know is famine because he's got the scale in his hands and it's got only so much food on it. The pale horse with the rider named Death is described by Jesus Christ, and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. And again, where the King James says, "and earthquakes in diverse places," the word Jesus Christ used there was "and seismus in diverse places." Seismus is not limited to earthquakes. either look online in a good Greek-English lexicon, pull yours off the shelf, or go buy you one. Look in a good Greek-English lexicon, friends, and you'll see that seismos is commotions in the air, with the example being gale force winds, such as the type we just saw in the last video from China, and commotions on the ground, such as, example is earthquakes, commotions on the ground, earthquakes, but seismic activity that can also on the ground can include volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, floods. And another term that wasn't used, the gospel writer Matthew didn't pick up, but Jesus Christ used the term that Mark picked up in Mark 13. If we go over to verse 8 of Mark 13, we see that Mark shows that Jesus Christ said, in addition to what Matthew wrote up for this fourth seal of Moimus, disease epidemics, and seismos, seismic conditions, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground, Mark said, and tarake, troubles. Your Greek-English lexicon will define tarake, troubles, as troubled waters, both literally and figuratively. And in the figurative sense, it says mobs and seditions. But this kind of trouble that Jesus Christ described, that mentioned, that Mark picked up in Mark 13, verse 8, as tarake, that's not the same word used for the fifth seal, for the mega trouble, the great tribulation. And we were about to point out in Matthew 24 and verse 21 how Jesus Christ tied that in with Revelation 6 by saying, "For then shall be great tribulation." And I was going to point out verse 8. He says, all these first four seals are the beginning of troubles. Those are the last thing he mentioned that Mark 13, verse 8 picked up on, attached to the fourth seal, tarake, trouble. That's just the beginning of troubles, because next, a major event in prophecy is the fifth seal, the great tribulation. And he says regarding the great tribulation, beginning in verse 9, Jesus Christ describes it this way. He says, "Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you." Afflicted. After they torture you to near death, then they will indeed kill you in a martyrdom. And you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then many shall be offended and shall betray one another. This is brethren of the same, supposedly of the same faith, doing this to one another, and shall hate one another. Of course, that's false brethren, because the true brethren, they stick to their faith. And even if they get left behind because they were lukewarm, if they follow through with the encouragement that Jesus Christ will come and give at that time, he'll come then and knock and say, look, you got left behind because of your lukewarmness. I couldn't bring you to the place of protection, nourishment, final training, safety that we set up, we being God and his angels, set up for you in a wilderness prepared by God, so that God's saints who are worthy, accounted worthy to escape, can be protected for 3.5 years during this great tribulation, the fifth seal. But if those who get left behind, Christ will come and knock on their door, knock on their hearts, and say, I see your knocking knees, and be aware. Look, be comforted. I went through it. I suffered martyrdom. I stuck through the crucifixion, even though I cried my heart out the night before and asked God, was there some way this cup could pass from me? And I sweat what looked like blood because of the concern I had over it. But God sent me angels to comfort me, and I'm here myself to comfort you who are left behind, to face martyrdom. That'll be our only way into the kingdom now. There's no way out of it, just like I had to do. I had to say to my Father, nevertheless, Father, not my will, your will be done. And those who are left behind, it'll be God's will that they suffer martyrdom, and Christ will come and say, hang in there. bear through it. If you endure it to the end, as I did, then you will sup with me at my table, at the marriage supper table, along with the other saints who will be at that marriage supper. They'll make it via the route of the place of safety, place of protection, final training, because they were accounted worthy to escape this great tribulation coming, this martyrdom. But hey, the end result's the same, whether you are taken to the place of safety and protected and nourished and trained for 3.5 years, being made ready to marry Jesus Christ, or whether you are left behind and go through this martyrdom of the fifth seal, the great tribulation. You wind up same place. Hey, it's eternity with Jesus Christ, reigning and ruling on this earth for 1,000 years, sharing his throne, being his wife. He'll be given a new name. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but he'll share that name with his bride. It'll be Mr. and Mrs. New Name. Now that's, and friends, you may be saying, hey, well, Stephen, I thought this was a news program. Friends, this is a news program related to the Bible and prophecy. And these stories that we're seeing in the news are telling you what's happening. The ones we pick out relate to these seals. And these seals are on the way toward the fifth seal, the great tribulation to come. And that's going to be the worst time on earth. Listen to Jesus Christ's words when we get to it in just a moment. Let me just finish up. We were in verse 10, and then shall many be offended, betray one another, shall hate one another. And verse 11, many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. Now, Christ reverts back to the first seal. The first seal, the white horse, being the horse of deception, religious deception. And because iniquity shall abound, verse 12, the love of many shall wax cold. But verse 13 is encouragement. He that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And let's skip up ahead to verse 21 again. For then shall be great tribulation. And that's, he was describing the things that precede the great tribulation. They precede it, and they will accelerate it to the point where you'll say, wow, the trouble is getting so great. We see United Europe coming together, which will occur during the fifth seal. You know then that, as he said regarding the fig tree, how when its branches become tender and it begins to sprout leaves, then you know summer's nigh. And he went on to explain what that means. I've covered that before. We'll cover it. And what that means is these seals are getting so active, you should be able to see, friends, that the fifth seal, the great tribulation, is right at your door. You know, or just down the street anyway. Summer is near. And he says, let's read verse 21 again. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. It's a time of Jacob's trouble, Jacob being one who had 12 sons who were divided into two houses, the house of Judah and the house of Israel. Israel having lost 10 tribes, house of Judah being named now as Israel, a little nation in Middle East, but also scattered all over the world, because that house includes Levi and Simeon, who had no inheritance. They're just scattered all over the place. The other 10 lost tribes, we now know where they are. I've put a slide up on this screen on this program before to show you that. Friends, we're going to go overtime a little bit Sunday night, as we often do. We make it a longer program because we're not on Friday and Saturday night. But verse 22, good place to stop from Matthew 24, and verse 22, except those days of tribulation, fifth seal, should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved alive. Because what's going to happen during the Great Tribulation is round 3 of World War will break out. And with the stockpile of nuclear weaponry that exists now, if Christ didn't come and cut it all short, except those days be cut short, be shortened, there should no flesh be saved alive. Men would push all the buttons that would blow everybody off the face of this earth, including the guys who press the buttons. There would not a man, dog, cat, animal, anything breathing be left alive on this earth after they blow all that nuclear stuff all around the world. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be cut shortened by Jesus Christ, who will intervene and stop it just in the nick of time. And mention the nuclear war. Friends, we don't really know how much China has, but we know this. They're not afraid to use it. The United States, we may have just a slight leg up on them, weapon-wise, maybe, but we've got tremendous restraints on us. We're afraid to use it. We bark a big bark, but then we don't bite. And so here Hegel barks at China. Well, China barks right back, and they've got bite behind their barking. They're willing to put some teeth into it. And so we better be careful. Not only may they have more weaponry than we know about, we think we got all this intelligence and know everything, they could have deals made with Russia and other places so they could have their hands on weaponry so fast it would just, you wouldn't be able to blink. It could happen overnight. China and Russia just made a big pact, a big deal for a gas purchase. They've already been making under-the-table deals about trading with their own monies between one another and bypassing trading with the United States dollar, the Yankee dollar, which they used to do, which gave the United States a lot of leverage, a lot of ability to, grab a piece of the action every time the money was used. They're saying, hey, we're not going to use the Yankee dollar as the reserve currency anymore. We're going to trade with the yen or with the ruble, and or some other money, not the U.S. dollar. So listen, and the United States owes China so much money that China has a stockpile of Yankee dollars in reserve that they could buy up the United States practically. They could bankrupt us real easy. So, I mean, how wise is it for the United States militarily to bark at China, considering all these factors? Not too smart. Ain't going to go too far. And the guy in China, you just heard him, he got right up and barked right back and said, we're not going to take that CRAP off of you anymore. All right, friends, let's cover a little more news. I wanted to stop and cover some things related, to show a little bit tonight how the news we cover here does, in fact, relate to the Bible and prophecy. And that's what this program is about. So when you tune in and get your news here, once in a while I'm gonna give you some jewels from the Bible related to how all this is working and will work out. Trains, mentioning Russia now, trains traveling from Moscow to Mariupol or in the Ukraine are usually packed full of passengers going on holiday. However, this year, people are staying away. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg reports from on board the ghost train.
So here I am on train 77 from Moscow to Mariupol. I'm going to be getting out in Donetsk in a few hours' time. Now, the ticket inspectors here tell me that normally at this time of year this train is packed with passengers. A lot of people getting onto the train in Moscow and going to the resort town of Mariupol for their summer holidays. That's not the case this year. Just look at this. This carriage, like many of the carriages on this train, is totally empty. There are no passengers here at all, apart from me. And that's because of the very difficult situation at the moment in eastern Ukraine. A lot of people too frightened to travel to that region. Now, the journey from Moscow to Donetsk should take around 19 hours. In fact, I've just been told by the ticket inspector it's going to take longer today because the train has to go around places like Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which have become flashpoints in this Ukrainian conflict. Well, I've been on the train now for more than 17 hours, and we've just made an unscheduled stop at this village station. Now, even the train guards admit that they don't know what the route is going to be from now on. They don't know what the next station is going to be, because apparently the train driver is trying to work out a safe route through to the final destination that would avoid any pockets of fighting.
And friends, there is some fourth seal activity big in the news. Real quick look at the chart again. The fourth seal is described in Revelation as the pale horse. It has a rider whose name is Death. The grave, Hades, hell, the grave rides alongside this horse and its rider named Death. And Jesus Christ described in plain language the activities of this horse as loimos, disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt, pestilence, seismic activity, commotions in the air, such as gale force winds that we saw in an earlier report tonight happening in China, and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. And, of course, volcanic eruptions are not only commotions on the ground, they are also commotions in the air, because that volcanic ash plumes up into the air, as you'll see in our next story. Flights to and from northern Australia cities are expected to resume after, especially the city of Darwin, are expected to resume after volcanic ash from an Indonesian volcano forced airlines to cancel flights. One of the mountains began erupting on Friday, with plumes of ash sweeping south towards Australia. Elaine Jung reports.
Columns of ash thrown 3 kilometres into the air from Indonesian volcano Mount Sanyang Api. The eruption sending huge plumes of smoke towards Australia, disrupting air travel and cancelling flights. The airport in the northern town of Darwin was forced to shut, with hundreds of passengers left stranded.
I don't know where we're supposed to sleep. Are you allowed to sleep rough in the airport?
You've got to be flexible, and safety does come first.
Fears of further airport closures have been allayed after meteorologists said the ash is beginning to clear.
That ash has come out and it's been moving quite rapidly to the southeast. It's been carried across central Australia. That's the main body of ash from the early eruption. However, there's an ongoing eruption at the volcano now.
Fine particles from volcanic clouds are potentially damaging to aircraft engines. Indonesia was largely unaffected by the eruption, but it could still take time before Australian air services return to normal. Elaine Jung, BBC News.
And friends, I have a story to, this may be our last story tonight. We'll have one more. I want to end on something light, one or two more. Afghan Taliban leader Mullah Omar has issued a rare public statement hailing the exchange of 5 Guantanamo Bay detainees for a Taliban-held U.S. soldier as a big victory. Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, 28, was handed to U.S. forces in Afghanistan on Saturday. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, he's making the news a lot lately. Defense Secretary Hagel has defended the exchange amid criticism. Congress was not given 30 days notice, the criticism being that Congress was not given 30 days notice before the before the detainees were released. David Lyon reports.
As the yellow ribbons of vigil in Bo Bergdahl's hometown in Idaho were replaced by balloons of celebration, the soldier began recuperation in a specialist military medical center in Germany. The Taliban too were celebrating as their 5 captives reached Qatar, calling this a great victory. Those words will enrage President Obama's Republican opponents, who see the decision to release the Taliban from Guantanamo Bay as giving way to terrorists.
I don't think what we did in getting our prisoner of war released in any way would somehow encourage terrorists to take our American servicemen prisoner or hostage.
Mr. Hagel said he hoped the prisoner exchange might lead to a wider peace settlement with the Taliban. A source close to the Taliban said they've got what they want for now. President Obama, appearing with Sergeant Bergdahl's parents, did not inform the Afghan government ahead of the swap for fear of jeopardizing Bergdahl's safety.
Sergeant Bergdahl has missed birthdays and holidays and the simple moments with family and friends, which all of us take for granted. But while Bo was gone, he was never forgotten.
We just can't communicate the words this morning when we heard from the President. So we look forward to continuing the recovery of our son, which is going to be a considerable task for our family.
Wonderful. It's a good day.
Yes, it's a good day.
One family reunited just months before US combat operations end here. David Loyne, BBC News, Kabul.
David Loyne, thank you very much. Friends, one more story of an important nature before we go to a light story and close for tonight. This story relates to a couple where the woman was sentenced to death in Sudan for abandoning Islam. The BBC is going to give some details that will explain a story you will be hearing about the woman being released, but it's a little more complicated than that. She's not just being released overnight. Reports that came out yesterday said a Sudanese official had confirmed that Meriam Ibrahim, who gave birth in custody, would be freed in a few days. But the Foreign Ministry said today, Sunday, Miss Ibrahim could only be released after a successful judicial appeal. Philippa Thomas reports.
Meriam Ibrahim on the day she married her Christian husband, and recently in her prison cell, cradling the daughter she bore with her feet in chains after being sentenced to death for apostasy. Her case has made headlines worldwide. An interview with this Sudanese official in London had given rise to hope that Meriam could be out within days.
That Meriam Ibrahim would be released through a judicial process in the coming few days.
But today, her lawyer said she'll only be freed when the order is issued by Sudan's appeal court.
We believe that Meriam has been convicted by a court, and the only one responsible for Meriam case is the Court of Appeal in Bahrain, Shangarnil. We believe she did not commit any crime, whether adultery or apostasy, because she's legally married, and according to the international agreement, which is ratified by the government of Sudan, there should be no apostasy crime.
Meriam's husband is seen here with baby Maya, the couple's second child. As far as he knows, the sentence of flogging for adultery and death for apostasy is still due to be carried out in 2 years' time.
No, I didn't get any confirmation or call from the officials saying that she will be released soon.
Even if any information from your lawyer?
Even from the lawyer.
So you don't get anything?
I didn't get anything. I just hear like anyone. It's just like Roma.
So the fate of the 27-year-old is still unknown, despite the international pressure to release her. Philippa Thomas, BBC News.
All right, friends, I said I would close with a light story, but after thinking about it, this story may not be so light for some of you who watch this program, I've often seen you write that a cup of coffee in the morning is extremely important to how you start your day. You know, you may have to wind up settling for a good hot shower instead because of a drought in Brazil. We're a big coffee growing region. And, you know, mentioning that, I mean, it's not I have to modify my words. It's not truly a light story when you consider the fact that the third seal, famine, one of the big causes of famine, third seal, black horse, third column over, number 3, where you see black for black horse, which Jesus Christ described as famine, and Revelation depicts as the rider of that horse having a scale in his hands. And let me just turn there real quickly. It's in Revelation 6. All six of the first 7 seals, well, there's 7 seals in all. The 7th seal, though, is 7 trumpets, and the 7th trumpet is 7 last plagues. So the 7th seal is a big, big deal. It takes up, if we spread the sheet out to the whole sheet, you can see that the 7th seal takes up more than half of the right side of the screen. But the first 6 seals, they take up a little less than half the page. And if we take a look in Revelation 6, the first 6 seals are described there. Then Revelation 8 describing and on describing Revelation, or describing the 7th seal, has a chapter all to itself. But these first 6 seals are described in Revelation 6, and that 4th seal, I wanted to go to that 4th seal and just mention it in verse 7 of Revelation 6. It says, "And when he had opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th angel, or the 4th beast, say, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell, Hades, followed him," Hades meaning the grave, "followed him. And power was given unto them over the 4th part of the earth, to kill with the sword." Well, now he's going back and reviewing the 2nd seal, the red horse, to kill with the sword, and with hunger, the 3rd seal, the black horse, to kill with hunger, famine, and with death. I meant to cover the 3rd seal. We're going to talk about drought and famine. Let's back up to verse 5, friends. Revelation 6, verse 5. We're going to read about the 3rd seal. And, verse 5, "When he had opened the 3rd seal," I jumped ahead of myself a moment ago, so let's backtrack to where I meant to be. Verse 5, "And when he had opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd beast say, 'Come and see.' And I beheld, lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice," verse 6, say, in the midst of the 4 beasts, say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see that you hurt not the oil and the wine." This is talking about a time of scarcity of food. In other words, a famine. So even Revelation 6 is describing what the time period is like. And if you look in Matthew 24, Jesus Christ will parallel that in very plain language related to that 3rd seal, the black horse, as being famine, where Jesus Christ says, verse 6, the red horse, verse 7, the black horse. Here we are. Now, verse 7 starts with a little bit of finishing up on the red horse. "For nation shall rise against kingdom, and for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines." So Jesus Christ described that rider of that black horse with the scale in his hands and selling the food at high prices, meaning the food is scarce. You got to pay a lot for it. When the demand is low, the price is high. Or when the supply is low and the demand is high, you got to pay a big high price for the food. And it'll be a time of scarcity of food. And this next story, scarcity of food comes from, and famine comes from, a big part of famine comes from drought. And a drought in Brazil, I'll finally get into introducing this story, friends. A drought in Brazil has hit its coffee-growing region hard in recent months, pushing prices up and ruining crops in the world's biggest coffee-producing country. So what does it mean for farmers and for the price of your cappuccino? Caddy Watson reports from Brazil.
Now, the drought has had a huge impact on this region, especially for the younger trees. This tree is about 18 months old, and it doesn't have an established root system, so it suffered more than the older ones. And you can tell when you pick off the cherries which contain the beans, a lot of them are very black and hard and won't be any use. But the bigger concern is next year. As you can see, the leaves here, they're drooping, they're really needing water, and they haven't been able to grow as much as they would have if there had been enough water. So what could happen next year is that it might take more beans to make that cup of coffee, and that's the big concern, not just what's happened this year, but what will happen in the future seasons too.
Okay, well, Caddy's through already. And friends, that's it for our extended Sunday night report of the day's current news. And on Sunday night, we go back and cover Saturday and Friday also, because we're not on Friday night and Saturday night. But God willing, we'll be back on again, tomorrow night, Monday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Tonight for the extended edition of Nightcast, friends. Thanks for joining me tonight. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.